Last night, you had a treasurer talking about the need to lift productivity by removing economic distortions that are shifting flows around the market. I'm sorry, this is communism, is it? Like, what are you talking about? I'm not sure what communist is, but it's getting broad.
I think, Adam, those remarks by the treasurer were in the director's cut of Das Kapital that didn't make it into the final edit. The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. If you want to join those wonderful supporters of our podcast and financially support our show so we can continue to produce great episodes every week, then we encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and subscribe to join the Patreon community of Socially Democratic. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a Wednesday afternoon on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. Last night in Canberra, Treasurer Jim Chalmers stood up in the House of Representatives and handed down his fifth budget. He called it ambitious in the face of adversity, and he called it the most significant tax reform package in more than a quarter of a century. And coming from a treasurer, that's the kind of language that you reach for only once in a career. So how historic was this budget? What are the centerpieces of this particular budget? Who are the winners? Who are the losers? What political implications does this have for the Labor government and for their opponents? And can you grandfather a negatively geared property if you don't have any grandparents? We're going to ask all of the tough questions. And to do that and help me unpack everything about this budget, I've got two of the best people in the country, starting with Adam Triggs from Mandala, one of the sharpest economic minds working on Australian public policy, somebody who can read a budget paper the way most of us can read a menu. Adam, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
I said to you off air, you did too good a job last time and I've had to invite you back on again. So that's your mistake.
Yep, I won't make that mistake again. Get ready. Very good.
And a voice that's familiar to many of the listeners on Socially Democratic, Emma Dawson runs the Chifley Research Centre, the most consistent and most rigorous voice on the Labor side of progressive policy debate in this country. Somebody who has been making the intergenerational equity argument for years before it was fashionable, and somebody whose verdict on a Labor budget actually means something on the inside of the building. Emma, great to have you back on the podcast.
Oh, you're too kind. It's lovely to be with you.
Let's get into it. And I want to start with, I guess, the thematics of this budget. And to you, Adam, first of all, where does this budget stack up against previous budgets from either Labor or coalition governments? And how far back do we have to go to find a budget of such significance as this one?
Well, look, I think the Treasurer is right. And, I think it's a good point that he wouldn't say that lightly if he wasn't confident that he could say that this was a very, very significant budget. If he wasn't sure about it, he knew he was going to get pushed back. And so I think he's right. I look at the last, this, as you say, this is the fifth budget from the Albanese government. I think the last four, if I'm being honest, were probably a little bit underwhelming. They probably didn't really step up to the challenges that we face as a country, whether it's housing, whether it's productivity, living standards, dramatically changing global economic environment, global geopolitical environment. But I think this budget really kicked it out of the park. I think this is a reform budget. He did the three big things on negative gearing, capital gains tax discount, and trusts, which were very controversial. He's really killed some sacred cows with this budget, which I think showed a lot of courage. My real hope from this is, and we look at the reform period in Australia's history, is that reform often follows more reform. You get this sort of snowball effect, and I hope that that's what we see here, that this really kickstarts a process, and now we can start thinking about what's next. And yes, your question, you look back at previous budgets, I think it's right to say that certainly over the last 20 years, it's hard to find a budget that is as significant as this. The COVID budgets were huge, of course, but that was because a massive crisis and it required enormous amounts of spending. That was a very unique situation. But in terms of ambition and reform, I can't think of one that's more significant. I don't know if you can, Emma, but not for me.
No, I can't either. It's a stonkingly good Labor budget. I think it's the best budget we've seen, easily in quarter of a century. And that's not to discredit the fine efforts of Wayne Swan, particularly through the global financial crisis. I think Swanee would have loved to have had the opportunity to do something like this, and we simply ran out of time back then. So, no, it really is. It's a reforming budget, but it's a very careful and thoughtful way to do the reform. They haven't just listened to the big populist voices that you can't touch it or you must, absolutely kill every investment property tax there is and not grandfather anything. They've done it in a way that will preserve the retirement nest eggs of a lot of small investors, and that's really important. What this is targeted at is speculators in the property market, but it's also been framed through, I think, really importantly, a focus on lifting productivity, because continuing to have trillions of dollars tied up in land, when this CGT discount was introduced, we were told it would lead to investment in the share market. We'd become a nation of shareholders and entrepreneurs. So, really, it is bold, but it's the right thing to do. And I think that Jim and Katie and the team have done it in a way that means younger people will still have opportunity to build wealth. They'll still have opportunity to invest in property. We'll be, applying negative gearing rules to new builds from 2027. There's also, some return of that money to tax cuts. It's not a tax grab. They haven't, they could have done it in a way to get a lot of revenue that would have actually been more distortionary to the market more broadly. So no, it's a very solid Labor budget. We haven't had one like this since the Keating years.
So we will talk more about the specifics in the budget in a moment, but I kind of want to get a sense from both of you about what does this do in terms of the Australian economy and the global context. The Treasurer began his remarks when he first stood up in the chamber and actually sort of set the context about what's going on overseas with the conflict in the Middle East, etc., and all those sort of dominant headwinds. Adam, you were on the podcast not so long ago, and we were having this broader conversation about the challenges of the Australian economy. What's your overall read in terms of the forecasting of growth in the economy, inflation, debt? Is the Australian economy more fragile than the headline numbers suggest, or is this manageable? How did you feel about some of these projections, not just in the next sort of 3 or 4 years, but going into the next decade?
Yeah. Oh, look, I think the forecast in the budget, I think good on them for having a crack at it, right? But who knows? And this is not a criticism of Treasury or the government. We just don't know what's going to happen. It's just so uncertain geopolitically what goes on in the Middle East and how that's going to flow through oil markets and what happens in Australia. That is just so much uncertainty there. And I thought, the Treasurer made a really good point where he talked about, where they thought this will do to the Australian economy, and they've obviously built that in. And he also gave the other scenario, which is that you could get oil prices going up to $200 a barrel. They could stick up there for years, which, we saw during the Iraq War. It's not sort of out of the question, but hopefully won't happen. And he talked about the consequence of that being that inflation goes back up to where it was during COVID. So it starts with a 7, which is an amazing thing if that was to happen. So I think they really just don't know what's going to happen. I think when last time we spoke, the sort of challenge, we sort of remarked that you didn't really want to be Jim Chalmers in this situation because it's just so difficult. And he had to thread this needle where you've got this stagflation environment where the economy is very, very weak, but inflation's high. And so if you try to use spending to get growth back up, you make inflation worse. And if you try to cut spending to get inflation down, you hurt the economy. And so he had to thread this needle where he had to try to find budget savings to get inflation down, he had to try to find things he can do on the reform side to get productivity up. And he needed to find some fiscal space to try to support households who are in deep trouble as the cost of living crisis gets worse. And remarkably, I think he's done a pretty good job of threading that needle, finding huge savings through the NDIS in particular, but also the reforms that he's put through that we just talked about, this productivity package that he's got in there as well, which I think lays the groundwork to do a whole bunch of things in planning and zoning and so on, and then balancing that with the support for households. It was a really difficult task for him to do, and I think he's done very well to manage to sort of land this one. It's very impressive, I think.
Emma, the Treasurer said that this isn't the budget we could have handed down in February. I think that was his remarks when he went on the 7:30 report, or 7:30 or whatever it's called these days, with Sarah Ferguson. Is that legitimate framing, or is it a convenient cover for harder decisions the government would have had to have made anyway, particularly on spending?
No, it's legitimate. This, the unpredictability of this Middle Eastern crisis at the hands of the most quixotic president in living memory, in any memory, it's completely unpredictable. And I think a lot of the measures that they have very swiftly put in place around building up a fuel reserve, around, creating a gas reserve for the East Coast, and some of those, targeted supports for energy relief have been a response to what's happened in the Middle East. But at the same time, they haven't backed away from the discipline, as Adam was saying here. They could have said, well, because of this, we're making all this, extra revenue from tax receipts. Let's spend it. And they have very consciously said, revenue gains we will not spend. We will spend where we have saved. So, and that's actually, it's not an easy thing to do. I've said this before. Labor treasurers have a huge, and finance ministers, huge battle on their hands because Labor cabinet ministers want to do stuff, right? They want to spend, they want to invest. So I think that discipline's been really important. It's not a fig leaf at all, but what they haven't let it do, which I'm thrilled about, is blow them off course from what was a very intentional approach to restoring some of the progressivity of our tax system, to supporting people that get their income from labour rather than investment, from restoring opportunity and giving young people a reason to keep striving and keep, pursuing social mobility. That's core Labor business. And it would have been very easy to say, well, actually, things are so uncertain now, we're going to take the path of least resistance, I think is how Jim put it. So no, they've really screwed their courage to the sticking place on this, not just because it's been something Labor's long wanted to do, but it's long wanted to do it because it's the right thing to do for the country, for the economy. There's nothing productive about the way those taxes operated. And if you look at where they are spending money, they're spending to lift productivity, to reduce red tape for small businesses, which are, the engine of so many of our communities, and to give people the sense that, it's worth going out and working hard and investing in my future because the government's got my back.
Adam, the productivity, you mentioned it before, and Emma just gave it a tip of the hat there as well. When I was watching the post-budget analysis, and I think there was some folks from Grattan and is it Chris Richardson?
Yep.
They were talking about productivity. I don't know if you saw the coverage there, but they were being a little bit cynical and saying there wasn't enough in this budget in terms of productivity, particularly when you had that big productivity forum a while ago. Is that a fair analysis, or do you actually think there are genuine things in here that will help start to get our economy to be far more productive than it has been in the last sort of decade?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily fair sort of economically or really politically. Like, I think politically the government has done a lot in this budget, and I think people say that they should have done more. I think it's a little bit politically naive to think you could have pushed the envelope further than what they've done here. I think the amount of criticism they're getting from, the AFR and the Australian and others sort of shows that they've done pretty well. But in terms of, is there more to do on productivity? Absolutely. I think, to Emma's point, what they've done on the tax side, I think, is going to play a really important role that I don't think has gotten as much attention, but it will have a productivity benefit because it means, as Emma said, directing capital in the economy towards more productive uses than just pumping it into that housing stock, which is already out of control. And when you're in a situation where you can't build more houses anyway because there's supply constraints, that money's not going anywhere except inflating cost of living pressures and house prices. So I think that's a big part of the productivity story, but they've also laid the groundwork for a more in the future, and that is through this productivity package that they've announced, this national competition policy work that they're continuing as well. Hidden within that is a huge amount of work that they've been doing with the states and territories around everything from planning and zoning to how our freight network works, around logistics. There's all of these different things that they've been working on through that, and I think that will slowly get rolled out over the next few months and into next couple of years before the next election. And so I think they've got that groundwork there as well. But yeah, I don't think it's right to say that this wasn't a productivity budget. I think it's all there, and it's going to move through the system as we go, I think.
All right, let's get to the substance of what was on the table. Emma, walk us through what actually is changing here with respect to the capital gains tax discount, negative gearing. What explain this to the lay people out there.
Yeah, so I think negative gearing's had all the headlines for 20 years, right? But those who understand the interaction of these things know negative gearing's been around since the 1920s. It only became a problem when the capital gains tax discount was introduced in 99, because what that allowed people to do, it used to just be that negative gearing allowed you to defer the tax you paid on an investment until it was returning profitability. What the combination with CGT did was allow you to push that tax off indefinitely, because when you sell, you got more than enough back, more than you would have got back under the inflation model. And I think admirably, Jim has been, there've been suggestions left, right, coming from left, right and centre literally on what to do with CGT. And most people very cautiously said, I'll just reduce it to 30% or 25% and that's fine. No, and he's done it properly. He's gone back to an inflation calculation methodology, which was what Keating introduced with the capital gains tax in 1985. And what's good about that is it doesn't distort the asset class of push people into land. It creates a level playing field for assets because shares and investments in business behave very differently in terms of growth. But actually, if you think about those people that have bought one or maybe two investment properties as a retirement nest egg, a lot of small business people, shop owners and so on, they hold on to those assets for a long time. And they'll almost all most likely be better off under an inflation adjustment methodology than they would under the 50% discount because of the fluctuation in inflation. What it's targeting is speculators, people that buy into the market, highly leveraged using negative gearing, everything's offset against their tax, and they're building massive property portfolios with huge tax concessions that aren't actually contributing anything to the country. So it's very tightly targeted in that way. The provisions to allow negative gearing to still apply to new build properties from next year, that's great. Is it a magic bullet for supply? No, it's not. But what it says, it returns to the principle of if you are benefiting from this tax concession, it's because you're investing in something that helps more than just your own bank balance, and which is the principle behind any business offset, that you're delivering something that creates jobs or economic growth, and therefore you should be supported to do that. So that really brings that back into play with the way it's been structured. They've also been really careful to say, the inflation adjustment method, there will still be a 30% minimum on any capital gains, so 30% tax minimum. You won't be able to game the system and get it right down under that, but they've exempted people on income support. So if you're a pensioner and you happen to retire, you're on a part pension and you sell that investment property, you're not going to be subject to the 30% minimum. You'll get the genuine inflation adjustment. So carving out anybody that receives any kind of income support in recognition that they're not looking to make a quick buck, they're looking to support themselves and their families. But it still gives young people an opportunity to utilise negative gearing if they want to invest. They just need to invest in new supply, which is a good thing. I don't buy the argument that it removes the opportunity to build wealth for younger people, and I think younger investors are a lot more savvy now than previous generations were. They've got tools to hand through the internet, through AI and others that allow them to invest in shares and in more productive startups and so on in a way that isn't as scary as, people piled into property because they understood it. They understood bricks and mortar and land. So that opportunity is still there, and it not only will be available to younger people, but it will drive investment in better things, as Adam was saying before. It's the right way to do it. It would have been much easier to sell a big, we've cut it to 20% or something. This is harder for people to understand, but really what it is a return to the legitimate way of doing capital gains as it was first introduced, and it recognises the different asset classes and how they behave. So, it's a very good outcome.
The other big one I would add, Stephen, is around trusts.
Yes.
Which is really interesting, especially because if you look in the budget, if you combine the impact of capital gains, the changes, and negative gearing, they're actually smaller than just the change of trusts alone. And so I think last time you and I spoke, Stephen, we talked about how there's all these different tax rates depending on how you earn your money in the economy. And one of the key challenges you have is that trusts allow some people to exploit those differences. And so if your partner, for example, earns less than you, then you can direct your income through a trust, provided you're getting dividends or something. And then you can direct through the trust that money to your partner so that you get the lower tax rate. And then you can direct it. I don't tell your listeners how to engage in tax fraud, but direct it towards your partner, direct it towards your kids. You can direct it towards an investment property. You can direct it to wherever you get the lowest tax rate. And so one of the things that trusts do is they allow people to arbitrage the holes in the tax system. So we should fix all those holes, and they've done that partly through capital gains tax discount and negative gearing. But another way to do it is just to let down the tires of the vehicle that people are using to actually exploit them. And so having a minimum level on trusts, the amount of tax that you have to pay, again, like Emma said, gets that balance right, because there are lots of people like charitable organizations who use trusts very responsibly. But by having that minimum, you're making sure that you're clamping down on people misusing it and using trust as a way of getting around tax as well. So it's another really big one, I think.
And there's a nice bit of symmetry here too, because when the capital gains tax discount was introduced in 1999, Labor opposed it initially, and they were brought on board through negotiations through the Parliament on the understanding that we would also implement this minimum on trusts. And then having got Labor's vote for the CGT changes, of course, Costello went, not going to do the trust thing after all, sorry about that. So it's a nice little fix-up across the board.
Yeah.
I've got two questions that are about the criticisms of this particular announcement, one from the left and one from the right. I'll give the right-wing question to you, Adam, and I'll give the left-wing question to you, Emma. The right-wing critique of it, which I saw on Sky News and also in the Hun, or in the Murdoch papers, was around the inflation number being the figure, the base figure to pay out of the capital gains discount, whereas with the previous discount was set at a figure. And so they were saying, well, there's going to be uncertainty in the market now. People won't know what they're going to get, what kind of discount they're going to get from that. Can you explain that to folks, what they're actually talking about there? And is that a reasonable critique? Is there uncertainty in the future for people wanting to invest?
Yeah, so the way it works is you previously got a 50% discount on the capital gains tax that you would pay on however much you made on, the investment property or whatever asset it is you're holding. So it was a set amount, and so there was sort of that guarantee. Whereas the way it used to happen under Keating and the way that's now been shifted is that it's basically about inflation. So it's just protecting the real value of your return. And so to say that, that creates uncertainty, well, welcome to the economy. This is how inflation works. Inflation, the whole reason that we have an independent reserve bank to keep inflation in check is because price stability harms investment. If prices are all over the shop, you're not going to create a business. You're not going to expand your business to sell more goods and services if you don't know what the price of those goods and services are going to be. So the criticism, I think, doesn't really make any sense, because it's basically just suggesting that, well, you need price stability to make investment decisions. And yeah, I agree. That's why we have a 2 to 3% inflation band within the RBA, and we have a very competent set of institutions who make sure that it's within there. So yeah, I don't really buy that argument. I feel like they're looking for arguments to make against this when they're not really stacking up, I don't think.
They're reaching. Emma, and then on the left, the Greens obviously were not happy about the grandfathering of the negative gearing. I just don't think that the government wanted to punish a whole bunch of people that made financial decisions based on the rules back then. And what's your critique of the Greens?
The Greens, oh man, they're cranky because they didn't get their all landlords are bastards framing, right? And all landlords are not bastards. Most of them have just done what the economic system in place told them to do for their own security. 73% of landlords only own one investment property, and another 12% only own two. And so these are people like, for example, first-generation Greek and Italian migrants that came out here and set up small businesses and never paid themselves any super, and this is their nest egg. You cannot throw those people to the wolves. And they are not greedy, nasty landlords. This kind of populist nonsense, they're cranky because this has removed their big campaign stick, right? We're the only ones on the side of renters. All landlords are bastards. It does not meet reality. And the grandparenting, as Jim very gender-friendly called it last night, I was very impressed.
I didn't even pick up on that, did you really?
He doesn't miss a beat, that man, I tell you what. The grandparenting has been done in a way, as I said earlier, that will protect those people for whom this is literally their retirement fund, right? But it won't spare the people that have been gaming the system, the genuine bastards. And so, yeah, of course the Greens are cranky on this because they've made it their identity for the last 5 years. But if you actually look at what's been adopted through the parliament, what has been adopted is a model that has been very carefully designed, quietly advocated for by people that know what they're doing, and it hasn't responded to the loudest voices on right or left, which is usually a pretty good indication that you've got it about right.
Adam, this figure of 75,000 Australians are able to achieve home ownership in the future. That number, is that a number based on modelling, and does that come about because they're expecting people who are currently owning property to rid themselves of that because of these tax changes? Is that the theory behind it, or have I completely fucked that up?
Yeah, that's the idea. So it's basically when you have these changes around capital gains tax and negative gearing, you withdraw a little bit of demand from the economy, fairly marginal. And that's another reason why grandfathering is useful as well, is you don't cause a huge reduction. You're able to step it through. And then the other thing of grandfathering is it only lasts for a certain amount of time because people will sell those properties, and then as soon as they do so, they're no longer covered by that. And so it automatically cycles out anyway. And so that gives you a nice sort of step down. And basically, as you get that demand coming out, you've got plenty of people we know all around the country who are very keen to step in and start their own journey into the property market. And so as prices step down, you get those people stepping in, and then that's what the Treasurer is referring to, and they're modelling about how many people would be able to come in. It's worth noting as well that one of the key reasons they focus on capital gains tax and on negative gearing is because that's the lever available to the Treasurer. A lot of the supply side stuff is not federal, it's state and territory. And so the work that they're doing there on planning and zoning reforms, which was buried away in the budget, but there's some exciting stuff that they're doing there with the states and territories. That's some stuff on the supply side. And so the 75,000 is based mostly on what we saw in the budget in terms of those tax changes, but there would be an increase as well as you start to see supply increasing from the work that Chris Minns and others around the country are doing too.
Emma, the Greens are also saying, I don't mean to keep giving you all the Greens questions.
I love it.
It's good.
But they said that this, with investors leaving the market, it would push up rents. Help me explain that argument. Why does that Why does that happen?
This is where they are so inconsistent, right? On the one hand, property investors, landlords are bad. On the other hand, well, now the landlords are going to leave, so we won't have anywhere to rent anymore. You can't have it both ways, guys. So there's no evidence really that rents will go up significantly. There might be the odd one that passes it on. They never pass on their savings or their earnings, by the way. So, but a lot of people rely on what happened in 1985 or 1986 when Keating scrapped negative gearing. There was not an explosion of rents. There was a lift in market rents in Perth and Sydney. In other cities, they went down. It had a lot more to do with supply constraints and population growth at the time than with anything to do with negative gearing. And the simple fact is, as Adam said, is, for every property that ceases to become a rental property, it becomes an owner-occupied property. Otherwise, it's bought by another investor and continues to be on the rental market. And again, the grandparenting of these changes means there won't be a mass exodus that would suddenly, if there were a mass exodus of rental properties, of landlords, those properties would sit on the market. They would drop the price, the entry-level price to buy the homes. It's a scare campaign. The way that rents move have a lot more to do with rental regulations that are passed by state governments. And if you look at what's happened in Victoria over recent years, there's been a lot of success in sort of moderating rental prices and purchase prices by properly regulating speculation in the rental market. So, no, I don't buy it.
What about one of the things that the ABC was showing this graph last night, talking about the average price of homes has grown at a certain rate far quicker than wages. What does happen long term to property prices? So folks, even just people who own their own home, maybe they're a Gen X kind of, speaking for myself as a member of the Gen X, that normally you can predict that the value of your home based on the suburb that you're living in 10 years' time will be worth blah. Do we find that that's across the board going to slow now, that property prices aren't going to grow as quickly as we're accustomed to over the last 20 years since the first of property booms happened after the 90s recession? Adam, do you want to grab that one? And then I'm keen to hear your thoughts on that one as well, Emma.
Yeah, well, the Treasurer, he was basing this on the modelling out of Treasurer, I think, made a good point last night, where this is not a reduction in prices, it is a reduction in the rate of growth. And this is the challenge that we had, particularly come out of COVID, where you had sort of a 3-year period where prices went up about 25%. Now, find me a young person who has a savings rate of 25% over that period. That means that instantly they've lost. They're on an escalator that's going in the opposite direction, and they just can't walk fast enough. And so what it really means is a moderating in the growth rate there, and that's primarily just because within the economy we have a certain amount of capital, and we've got these tax distortions that are pushing it all into property for no apparent reason. And this is to the point of the rents question. If you just remove those distortions, if there's a big demand for rental properties, well, then you'll have more rental properties. You don't need the government intervening in this to try to miraculously pop it up for some reason through these tax measures. And so, but it really is just a sort of moderating of growth more than anything else. And the budget numbers show that you're not going to get anything worse dramatic than that, I don't think.
The Libs and Barnaby Joyce, Emma, really tried to fuel this, this anxiety that all of a sudden your properties are going to be worth nothing.
Yeah, and it's nonsense. No, exactly what Adam said. It will ameliorate the rapidity of the growth that we've seen in house prices. And that's actually critically important, because the more that house prices become divorced from wages, it doesn't matter how cheap consumer goods are or, fast fashion is available. If your ability to keep a roof over your head is declining every year because your wages are falling so much further behind, then you are effectively creating a country in which you have to inherit in order to own property. So it's a really important principle, but it's not going to smash the price or the value of everyone's home. And I think the idea that a lot of investors in Sydney, or home buyers in Sydney and Melbourne, particularly in the sort of, blue chip suburbs, would say, well, I've been relying on my house doubling in value every 10 years. Well, that's absurd. It's not sustainable. You had a nice run, bank it, and then, let's adjust to the new reality. And I think this is one of the reasons why this generational framing is so important, right? And a lot of people got cranky at me for this. Oh, it's a class issue, and it's capital versus labour, and it's all those things. Sure. But the fact is, even those people who've done very well, that bought a house in the 90s and have seen its value quadruple and then have put their equity into some investment properties, they're still concerned about their kids, right? They still go, well, I've done really well, but my kids can't afford a house. And if I was to help all three of them, I'd have to sell mine or raid my super, and this is no good. So it is a way of getting people to see fairness through their own familial lens. A lot of households have been practicing a kind of interfamily redistribution themselves, right, by helping their kids get into the property market. And they see that there's a limit to that. So yeah, it's the beat up. This is terrible, and it's going to tank the residential property market. It's not. I mean, Australian house prices have just not. They've never crashed. They won't crash because of this. They will hold up, but the entry-level properties will become more affordable to wage earners over time, and that's really critically important, not just for individual well-being, but for the feeling that people have a stake in the economy, a stake in our democracy, in our country, right? Why do you get out of bed and go to work every day if you think you're not going to be able to put a roof over your head? So yeah, it's really important for trust and social cohesion as well. I know the Prime Minister's been sneered at a bit for making that link, but it's absolutely true.
I think someone on Insiders last night, one of the commentators talked about this as class warfare. They may not have used the term warfare, but they certainly.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, well, first of all, you've just dusted off your 2019 talking points, but I just don't feel like this budget was class warfare. To your point, Emma, there are people in one home, parents who are, okay, they might get a little bit of a kick in the pills with these new changes, although the grandparenting will mitigate against that. But at the same time, there are their kids in that same home who are going to benefit from it. And I wouldn't peg that family as in two different classes. So I don't think there is class warfare happening in that particular home, which I think that there's more to this budget than just simply reframing it as a black and white.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really lazy, actually. And if you talk to people that are genuine liberals or believe in the market, like Adam was saying earlier, if you're an investor, you have to ride, price instability and markets and so on. Suddenly you don't want to do that anymore when it doesn't suit your interests. But this idea that, people are saying, oh, this is just an attack on wealth. No, people can see actually it's not a Robin Hood thing. We're not robbing you to give money to people over here who've never put any effort into their own lives, which is what people tend to, it's pejorative, it's not true, but that's the kind of class warfare frame. This is about giving our kids the same opportunity that we had. Who can argue with that? It's just a fact that if you were born before kind of 1975, you had a reasonable chance of having a family before you turned 40 and having them live in a house that, didn't mean you had 4 kids to a bedroom and 6 people sharing a bathroom and you were still paying rent for it. It's just about giving people the same opportunity to build a good life. And that there's nothing communist about that. It's not class warfare, it's just common sense.
Yeah, I think the class warfare argument, I think, is bad politics and terrible economics, right? There are people in Sydney who are on stonking great big incomes, substantially higher than the average, who don't have a hope in hell of ever purchasing a house within cooey of the city. And so the suggestion that this is class warfare and that those people are somehow poor is crazy. Like, they are statistically very well off, and even they can't do it. And so the economics is very bad. But the politics of taking that message is just going to come across as so tone deaf. I think they would be really wise to steer away from that one.
The Daily Telegraph certainly didn't. Their front page this morning surprised me, actually. I don't know why. I should have just realised that they're just going to revert to type. But I just thought that this, it's kind of, remember when Bob Hawke in the 1983 election. Sorry, we're really showing our ages here. Do you remember 1983 when Malcolm Fraser tried to roll out an old Labor Party is the Communist Party trope, and Hawke just laughed it off. But it was a seminal moment in the campaign because the communist accusation against the Labor Party all through the 50s and 60s and 70s had haunted us electorally. But in 83, it became a gag because we just obviously moved so far away from that past. And I just feel like this was a similar kind of moment where the editorial team of the Tally have gone, well, what do we do? And someone said, well, in 2019, we ran the class warfare stuff. Let's just give that a spin, not realising that there are hundreds of thousands of Australians, all in their 20s, 30s, and maybe even early 40s, who are just desperate for some kind of structural change to the way that our economy works, so they can buy a freaking home. Would read the front page of that and go, well, I don't give a shit whether it's communist or not.
Also don't know what a hammer and sickle represents, right? That doesn't mean anything to them. And the point. One thing I think no one's sort of picked up on is what's changed since 2019, and the commentary, it kind of goes, oh, well, now millennials and young people are the majority of voters. What else changed was COVID, right, which really exposed to people just how precarious their lives were, that they were heavily indebted, big mortgage debt. Private debt in this country is through the roof. Our public debt's really low. And people in COVID went, well, what if I do lose my job? What if I can't go back to work? And so that sense that, the false security of my house values going up so I'm all right, people went, well, I can't eat my house, So there was a kind of realisation, that a lot of that living high on the hog through taking on more debt was risky, but also B, that actually we are all in this together, and so I think it was a profound mind shift amongst the community that happened almost immediately after that 2019 election. So that's changed the views of a lot of people that aren't under 45 as well.
Also, last night you had a treasurer talking about the need to lift productivity by removing economic distortions that are shifting flows around the market. I'm sorry, this is communism, is it? What are you talking about? This is free market. This is, I was at an event with Andrew Lee with the Young Listener, and he was saying if you were libertarians, you'd be voting for the Labor Party. And that's what he was doing. You look at all of the economists who write in our papers. Richard Holden gave Jim a whack this morning, but he also backed in the reforms to negative gearing and capital gains tax because they're distortions. Yeah. They're crazy. So, the idea that this is somehow communist is, I'm not sure what communist is, but it's getting broad.
I think, Adam, those remarks by the Treasurer were in the director's cut of Das Kapital that didn't make it into the final edit. And okay, let's talk winners and losers. And I'm going to throw you a fastball right down the middle, Emma, so you can take a big swing at it. That's a good thing in baseball, not a bad thing. Okay. Who are the winners in this budget?
The winners are young people, first home buyers, young people in social housing that are on youth study or app study, $60 million to provide to shore up social housing places for young people. Aged care residents, 5,000 more beds a year for aged care residents. Taxpayers, permanent earned income tax offset. Now, it's only $250, but it's a start of something that actually is a really clever way of putting money back in the hands of people that are contributing productively to the economy. And I think, First Nations communities have been a big winner. There's a lot of focus on them in this budget, and the healthcare sector as well. I think that, the people that are winners out of this budget are the people that have been losers for far too long in previous iterations of national accounts. And ultimately, the long-term big winner is the Australian economy and its robustness and its resilience, right? Because a lot of what they've done that's not sexy, as Adam said earlier on, our economy is in a much better shape to deal with these global disruptions than a lot of advanced economies are. But a lot of what the government did last night will really strengthen that resilience and strengthen our ability to, ride out some of these global factors. So, I think we're all winners to some extent. There are no...
This is a group hug.
Group hug. It's a great Labor budget. The people that are that stand to lose anything from this budget have been winning for so long that they've got their trophy cabinets cannot take any more. So, I don't see them as losers. I see them as just a little bit of a course correction.
Any other winners, Adam, before we jump to losers?
No, I think that's right. I mean, in many respects, I think what we're doing here in terms of lifting productivity and addressing these sort of challenges, the benefits from that are pretty widespread. But, I think the Treasurer is right to give this an intergenerational lens. And I think that was a very sensible thing to do. And I think that's probably the main way that I would think about that, is that young people are being given a bit of a leg up. They're getting a chance from this. And I think it's going to cut through really effectively. And I think it's going to cut through across party lines as well, which I think is going to be really interesting to watch over the next few months. And
also, if I can add to the winners, Jim Chalmers.
Absolutely.
Was a winner last night. I just thought that I'll admit, I don't normally watch the budget night delivery. It's I'd rather get shot in the head than listen to it. But I have tuned in since we've been doing this podcast over the last 7 years. I have been watching them. And obviously, Emma, you've been on the show a couple of times where we've done a post-budget analysis. But I watched it and it threw me back to the days of when Costello was Treasurer, in the early days when we lost. And we were, basically just eating shit from the Tories because they were belting us at every election. And the arrogance of Costello in his budget delivery, because he knew that he was on a winner. Now, do we agree with the politics of it? No. Do we agree with the economics of it broadly? Probably not. But you got to kind of give the guy some ticks because they were on a high. Things were going so well for the Tories from 96 to whenever. And last night was the first time I felt we had a Labor Treasurer doing the Labor version of Costello, not the arrogance and not the unbuttoning and rebuttoning of the suit and all that bullshit, but just actually delivering something that you could feel proud about. And I think that he felt that. And I often looked at the folks on the front bench and the back bench as he went through it. And it wasn't just performative nods. There were moments there where there were natural human reactions from the caucus going, oh, fuck, that's pretty good.
That's why they get into politics, right, is to do this stuff. And I think it is remarkable that you've got sort of 94 seats in Parliament and that you're actually not arrogant at all. Like, I think that's one of the most impressive things that Chalmers does, is that he gets the tone right. He never attacks property investors. He's never sort of vicious like that. There's no lifters and leaners sort of attempts at division. Like, anything he did where it had a negative impact on people, he was sympathetic to the impact that it had on them. And I thought that's probably the most striking thing.
Yeah.
And it's genuine. It's genuine, right? That's who the guy is. He is thoughtful about everyone's circumstance. He's not a gloater. He doesn't seek to humiliate people or get one up on them. But what you saw last night was absolute confidence and authentic pride in what was being delivered. And you should have seen my face at the budget dinner. I was almost in tears. It's like, yes. And you could feel kind of pent up from so many, not just from Jim himself, but from, like you said, all the faces behind him and the ministry as they, emerged from the House last night, that this is a Labor budget, man. We are proud of this. We have, this is what we want to deliver. And finding, the confidence to do that in your, not just because of 94 seats, not just because the opposition's in disarray, but because you've done the work and you've taken the time to explain it to people and you've consulted about it and you've designed a package that isn't just, it's not aimed at good headlines, right? They knew they'd get the headlines they got today. It's aimed at actual economic growth and reform and opportunity. And so, it's an authentically very, very satisfying thing for a Labor government to do. And he's very good at not just the nuts and bolts. He's got a great team around him as well. Like, let's not forget the staff in the office. Particular shout out to Claudia Crawford, who's chief of staff, who's just a powerhouse and would hate that because she doesn't like to be named, but she's excellent. But not just getting the nuts and bolts right, but the delivery of it and the communication of it was authentic and sensitive and real. He sounded like a human being, which is what he is. It was great.
And he looks tired. And, he has put himself into this, right? And so, no one can accuse anyone of laziness here, right? The amount of effort that he's put in is pretty remarkable, and hopefully he gets some sleep this weekend.
Yeah. And him then having to follow up and go on the 7:30 report with Sarah Ferguson straight afterwards, I assume he has to run from the chamber to do that. It's not pre-recorded, is it, right? Yeah. Nope. But I don't know if you noticed, but when they had that wide shot, he's literally leaning in and basically come and give me your best. I know my shit here, and this is a good budget, and I'm ready to sell it. And she's a hard interviewer. Like, she does her job, but he handled that so well because it is a good budget. It is a good budget.
It. It was it was Paul Keating. Like, I think I put on some social media. I'm not on much anymore. He genuinely demonstrated last night that he is the true successor to Keating when it comes to having mastery of the budget in the national interest, and being fully across your brief, but also understanding the people you're delivering for. Very impressive performance on 7:30.
And just quietly, he did a lot better than the guy who followed him on the report. And that's going to be the next question, right, is what happens on Thursday when we see the budget reply, whether or not the coalition can string a coherent narrative together about what they actually stand for. And I think the 7:30 report showed that they are nowhere near that. And that's pretty alarming for anyone who's in the Liberal Party, I think.
I almost felt sorry for Tim Wilson.
I did a little bit when the notes comment was made, I thought that was oof.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm glad you said that, Adam, because that actually kind of annoyed me a little bit, because you could see. I mean, the guys, I don't know when the opposition gets the papers and how much time they've got to actually kind of digest it and their teams and whatnot. But when Sarah Ferguson had a go at him by saying, you need to check your notes, and it literally was the quickest eye look at his notes.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, Sarah, come on. Like, you could give him a bit of grace just to kind of make sure he gets his facts and figures right, to the point which then Sarah Ferguson conducts the rest of the interview by looking at her notes of questions prepared for her by her producer. If I was a prick, if I was Tim Wilson, I would have said, well, fine, Sarah, I'll throw away my notes if you throw away yours, and you can just try and make up the questions off your own bat. Anyway, but other than that, no, he had no idea. They were struggling. I actually lost interest in what he was saying, because I just thought that you're not landing a glove on this budget at all. This is just, you are dancing around the outskirts and not making any impact whatsoever.
Yep.
Okay, speaking of losers, who are some of the other losers to come out of this budget? Adam, I'll throw you that curveball and see if you're going to have a swing at it.
Why do I get the losers? Anyway, look, I think when I read the sort of coverage today, I think people are suggesting there are losers. I'm not entirely sure I necessarily agree with it. So one of the groups, which I think is super important, is recipients of NDIS. NDIS cuts have been a huge part of how they managed to rebalance the budget to the extent that they could. And so I think it is super important. People are saying that this is extremely bad for people on the NDIS. My personal view is that, and I think the Treasurer made this comment as well, is that you're really saving the NDIS from itself. I don't think the NDIS is going to be able to continue if we're spending more money on just autism alone than we spend on the army. That is not going to be a sustainable proposition to the future. Everyone knew you needed to have something done about that. If the Libs are the ones who are going to do it, they would probably just gut the entire thing. So they had to do something. And so, I don't really buy the argument that Labor is, that there's a big group of people who have suffered a lot here. I think that was really what they've tried to do here, is to make it sustainable, to save it. I mean, the other group who are being characterised as losers from the budget are people who are property investors. Again, they're grandparented in, the vast majority of them, and the changes that they'll face now to capital gains tax discount is from now onwards. In fact, they've even got a longer grace period than that. And so I don't think you can really say you're a loser based on something that you're expecting in the future to stay forever. And just to really, back in that point, I think anyone who is banking on capital gains tax or negative gearing, unless you've been living under a rock for the last 30 years, you know that those things were going to go at some point, right? They are not politically sustainable. They're not fiscally sustainable, in the same way that anyone who's relying on franking credit cash refunds, we all know those are probably next, right? Like there is a big political discussion about whether or not you keep them. They're also insane. The fact that they had the restraint not to get rid of them at the same time, I think, is interesting. But yeah, again, I think it's, people know that those things are already on the chopping block, and I just think it's pretty fake to sort of act surprised that these things were removed.
I'd be glad if they got rid of franking credits so my accountant doesn't have to explain to me what franking credits are every 12 months and I get to lie down afterwards. Exactly. If I can get rid of that conversation every 12 months, I'd be wrapped.
Can I weigh in a bit on the NDIS stuff? Because I think it's important. And I know there was a post on Blue Sky from Ben Eltham saying it's a massive slash of social spending. The NDIS is not social spending. It's not welfare. It's an insurance program, right? And it's meant to operate according to the principles of an insurance program, and it has not been. Now, the problem is that too many people on the left see it as welfare, and too many people on the right see it as a ready market to exploit. What it needs to be is a program that is about insuring people against terrible events in their life, whether that is an injury that causes them to live with a disability, or whether it's a lovely event like the birth of a child that is tempered by the fact that that child has extremely special needs. The important thing about this, and I did the work, the figure that people like Jordan Steelejohn often cite, that every dollar spent on the NDIS returns $2.25 to the economy, that is based on the fact that you are helping people with severe disabilities that reduce their functional capacity to participate in social life or in economic life. That $2.25 return does not come for kids that have developmental delays due to autism. That you will not get that return. That return is for how do we get this person who's had an amputation back to work? How do we support this family whose child has such incredibly intense needs that neither parent can work? So the way that the scheme operates, and in order to keep it for its original purpose and not allow it to be continued to be exploited like a voucher system, which is what the coalition did. They took government when we were still in the trial phase of this project and then just rolled it out without doing any of the kind of community work or ensuring those other supports were there. That will send it so far off the rails that it will die eventually. A Tory government will come in and kill it. This is essential to ensuring that scheme is still there for the people it was designed for.
Where I want to wrap up is just get some thoughts on the politics of this budget in terms of how do the coalition, the Greens, and indeed One Nation respond to it. Starting with the coalition, now I guess we've sort of touched on it a little bit before about Tim Wilson's performance on 7:30 report last night, but to you, Adam, they're in a bit of a bind here, aren't they? Because they're going to, if they decide not to support the significant parts of the budget, certainly around the negative gearing and the capital gains tax discounts, they're kind of picking a team, aren't they, in terms of voters? And one group they need to get the votes from are young people, and young people are going to benefit from this. They're in a bind here. What do you expect to see from Angus, I've got great hair, Taylor on Thursday night in his reply? What do you expect?
They're definitely just painted into a corner, right? The challenge that they've got is in order to ever form government again, they need to win back all of the people who they've offended. And they've offended young people, they've offended women, they continue to offend migrants, they're offending anyone in the inner cities. And the challenge that they've got is that the package that Labor has put in this budget is appealing to all of those groups. And if they're going to oppose those things, then they're going to find themselves just pushing themselves further down the path that they're on, which is just towards irrelevance. And so if you think of negative gearing and capital gains tax discount, for example, those are going to be popular measures among young people. They're just going to say, well, you can't get rid of this. They'll make up some reason for it that, people are making decisions on this stuff or whatever it is. But they're not going to have anything to replace it with. And they're not going to be able to say, young people, here's our approach or what we're going to do to actually address this. And that's not so much a prediction, it's more just a reality. Again, to what we said before, there are only a few levers that the federal government has at its disposal, and these are the levers that the Labor Party is pulling. The rest of it is in states and territories. So if they try and spin some kind of, well, we're going to get New South Wales to do this, well, it's not really, in a federal budget speech, it's more appropriate in the New South Wales Parliament. And so I think they're really going to be painted into a corner there. The challenge that they've got, and you saw this coming out of Farah, is that they're probably going to keep going down the immigration line and pushing that harder and harder, and saying that the solution to housing is going to be cutting immigration. The solution to all our problems will be cutting immigration, and that's just not going to cut through. And so I think the Treasurer is probably going to be sleeping pretty well tonight, knowing that what he comes up with tomorrow is not going to be that compelling, and he's probably just going to struggle to come up with a coherent narrative about what the Liberal Party stands for and what you should actually vote for them for. So, but yeah, it'll be very interesting to watch. I'll be watching that very closely.
Emma, your thoughts on what we expect from the Tories? Can I add an additional reflection? Some speculated last night that there was going to be a big scare campaign coming from big business, much like they did with the mining tax many, many years ago. Are you worried? I'm not worried.
No, I'm not worried at all. So the first thing to say is I do expect that Angus Taylor will make what his colleague Andrew Hastie described as a last stand for neoliberalism in his budget reply tomorrow night, and no one's going to reward him for that. I don't know that he has anything more coherent to say, and I think Adam covered that pretty well. I don't think a scare campaign from big business will cut through at all. And again, I'm going to quote Andrew Hastie twice. He said in that same interview on Insiders that he thinks business has lost a lot of its social licence, and I think he's right about that. The mining tax scare campaign worked 15 years ago because people were still under the impression that it was that sector that drove our wealth. And I think people see now that it's not. More younger people are much more concerned about the climate impacts of that industry, but they also know that it doesn't employ very many people anymore. It really doesn't. Most of back in the mid-2000s, they still had a lot of, blue collar workers driving trucks in mines. They don't anymore. All that stuff's automated. And I think big business more generally, they can very easily be called out on this to say, well, why? If you're genuinely a liberal or even a neoliberal and you believe in the market delivering better living standards, why would you support a system that locks all our money up in unproductive assets? Why? Only because you're interested in your own personal wealth. That's the only possible conclusion, and people can see through that. And I think, the fact that we've got university graduates who've got, maybe even a postgraduate degree, and they're still schlepping coffees in cafes because they can't get a job using their skills in this country because of the lack of diversification in the economy. Young people are alive to that too. And then the other argument is that older people will go, well, the conditions that I experience that allow me to buy a house, I can see now that my kids don't have that experience. So what are you talking about? So I don't think a scare campaign like that cuts through at all, because they've lost that power through evidence, lived experience of people. But also people are doing an end run around their organs of communication. The fact that basically the Murdoch press does not have anything like the power outside of Canberra that it had 10, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, because young people are getting their news from other sources. And I actually think there's still a belief in amongst a lot of people in Canberra that those legacy media companies have more influence than they do. When you get out to the regions and you get out to, outer suburbs, people, they're not tuning into the 7 o'clock news anymore. They're not even buying the paper in the morning. They're grabbing their phone and jumping on TikTok and doing a Google search, and then they'll find someone to explain it to them in their own terms. So, no, I don't think the kind of scare campaign that derailed so much of Wayne Swan's efforts to lift productivity back in the Rudd Gillard years is nearly as effective now as it was then.
The point that I would just make quickly, just to back that in, is I don't think that big business have a problem with this budget. Really, if you think mining don't care about this budget, there's nothing really in there for that. In fact, if you look in a lot of the details of this budget, there was an R&D tax credit. They've lifted the ceiling on that. That's going to benefit a lot of companies. They've been pushing for that for a long time. Robin Denham had a report where she pushed for that. There's a whole bunch of things in the productivity space that I actually think business is quite happy about. This is really more about high net wealth individuals who might get annoyed by some of this stuff, although to the previous discussion, a lot of it's grandfathered in, a lot of it knew it was coming anyway. So I actually don't think that big business have a problem with this budget. And I think that's just another problem that Angus Taylor's got, is that big business, even if they did have a problem with this budget, big business don't really have a home with the coalition anymore.
No.
Peter Dutton turned on them viciously in the Voice campaign. And so now big business are really looking for a new home. And so they're not even really situated with the coalition, even if they did have a problem with this budget to begin with. So I mean, what the coalition is really missing is just strong stakeholders. They don't have people voting for them for one thing, but they also don't have a natural constituency in terms of fundraising or anything like that as well. So they're really in a bit of a bind.
And you look at the mess that they made of the energy system, right? I mean, Taylor's directly responsible for a lot of that, and business knows that. So, yeah.
Oh, we've definitely covered that topic over the last couple of weeks, so let me reassure you. Adam, One Nation, their response to this I found interesting. There's a section of this One Nation vote that's growing since the last election, which it was a 7% primary. Now we're seeing figures of upwards of 20. And there's a group of that growth, I think, is based on individuals who look at both Labor and Liberal and sort of say a plague on both your houses because you are a part of the system, and this system is fundamentally flawed and making it harder for us to improve our lives. And then last night I felt that Labor sought to address some of those systemic structural impediments in the Australian economy. Barnaby Joyce then gets up on Insiders and was specifically asked about, what is One Nation's position on this? And his answer was that this won't do anything, and what we should be doing, when pressed on what was the changes that should be made, he was talking about sort of regulatory changes because I felt like he couldn't bring himself to talk about to shitting on institutional wealth like, primary producers or farmers or older homeowners. And I just thought, when I was watching it, I went, oh my God, you are still an agricultural Tory at heart, even though you've changed the colour of your T-shirt. I just wonder how One Nation's response to this budget will go down with the urban pockets of voters that they're seeking to win over and get a foothold in, either at the next state election here in Victoria or in New South Wales next year, or the next federal election. What's your take on how One Nation's going to respond to this?
So, I mean, One Nation has a huge problem, which is that they're going to have to come up with policies. And they are not used to this. Like, they have one policy, and that is a policy on immigration, and even that's not entirely clear what exactly they want. But coming out of the Farrer by-election, Pauline Hanson stood up there and she started talking about what they wanted to do on gas and talking about what kind of policy they're going to shape there. And what's really going to happen here is that now that One Nation has come up in prominence, which is a terrible thing, but the sort of good thing that will come from it is that they're going to have policy positions on a whole bunch of things. And that is when they're going to start coming unstuck. When they have to try to just agree among themselves, and I guarantee that Barnaby Joyce didn't consult with Pauline Hanson before any of this, coming up with agreement on what is your gas policy, what's your policy on capital gains tax, on negative gearing, on franking credit cash refunds, on trust, and all of these things. That's when they're going to start coming unstuck. And in particular, because their base, like the large chunk of their base is coming from Gen X, no offense, Stephen, but there's a lot of Gen X people in regional communities. And really for them, their numbers are very, very soft. They haven't put out any policies. People are, as you say, coming to them because they're just pissed off with the major parties. And that means that they can lose those votes very, very quickly. And so they're in a very risky situation at the moment, I think. And so what will they come up with? Like, I'd be surprised if they could really come up with a very coherent response. But again, they're in the same situation as the Liberal Party. Like, you can't agree with Labor because they have, put themselves as being the opponents of that. But if you're not going to do that, you need to come up with your own policies, and that's where they're going to come unstuck. So I think it's going to be super interesting to watch how they try and navigate this, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the unsung genius of the budget last night is both One Nation and the Greens have built their following on the idea that, the major parties are all the same. They're just in to protect the status quo. We want to blow the joint up. Well, Jim Chalmers did not protect the status quo last night. He made some pretty bold moves in the interest of ordinary people. So that argument just falls over. And I think like you say, what's going to happen to One Nation now is what happened to the Greens in the last term of government, which was when they were put on the spot over their actual policies, particularly on housing, they were shown to be all talk and no responsibility, and that when you actually dived into what they said they wanted to do, it would have had the opposite impact to what was needed. And that will happen now with One Nation. You can't have a movement that's based on no one's acting in our interest, they're all in the interest of the wealthy and big business, and then oppose a move that is actually all about redistributing some of that power and some of that wealth to people who are doing it tough and on their own efforts. It leaves them in a completely incoherent position on both the populist right and the populist left.
And to that point, Emma, the Greens, it was interesting. Larissa Waters, the new leader of the Greens, I completely forgot they existed until last night, was pressed by David Spears, I think it was, on, are you going to support this? And, to pick up on that point you just made before, Emma, they held housing reform ransom and got kicked by the electorate, lost all of these seats that they'd worked so hard over, basically a decade to pick up. And, David was pretty kind to her. She never gave an answer because she knows deep down that if the Greens vote against this, they are fucked.
They are toast, mate. Absolute toast.
But they have to be relevant. So she's got to say something. Oh, well, we'll have a look at it. No, you won't. You'll pass it. Or otherwise it's political suicide.
That's right. You pass it, or not only are you wiped out in the House, but you won't even, you'll lose Senate seats at the next election. This is something that the constituency they have tried to foster over the last 5 or 6 years under Bant and Max Chandler Mather is young people angry about being locked out of the system. If they don't pass this, they're showing that they are just playing pure politics. And so they have to. They might bitch for a while, but as Catherine Murphy said, they'll bitch and fold. They'll fold very quickly. They have to. And actually, any of the sort of vetching that they want to do about, it doesn't go far enough and we shouldn't have grandfathered anything. If we did it the way that they wanted to do it, it really would be class warfare and generational warfare, and it really would disrupt the rental market, and it really would cause a lot of ordinary people a lot of pain. And I just think that the electorate is not stupid about this. Anyone that is invested in this particular tax policy issue knows how wickedly complex it is, and knows that, it might feel good for them to say all landlords are bastards, tax the billionaires. They're slogans, they're not policies. So they're going to have to back it, and they're going to have to be gracious about it. Otherwise, they will continue to lose the support of people that would otherwise vote for them.
That's a shame. Well, Adam, Emma, it's been wonderful. That's your hour. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure that you're probably sick to death of talking about the budget. It's probably been your life. That's also true. But it's been your life, as people in this particular field of expertise for the last couple of months. So I really appreciate you both coming on the show today and giving us a bit of a review of last night. A great night for Labor, a great night for Australians, without saying like Bill Laurie, and we'll have to get you back on the show maybe later in the year to talk a bit more about economics and see where this budget's taken us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Great day for the country.
Yep.
Hey, Social Democrats, thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.